I wanted to say one quick thank you to our sponsors. I know that you all in business know what it takes to put a meeting like this together, and what it takes is the support of people who are able to make it possible. So I went through a couple of the major sponsors last night. You have a banner up in the back and a sign up here. Let's just remember to acknowledge their roles again. Guggenheim, University of Alaska Fairbanks. Shell, I didn't mention Shell last night. Cam Toohey, I don't know if you're in the room. If you are, we thank you immensely. Port of Nome, Edison Schwest, Shell Production and Exploration, to be specific, and the Great Lakes Dredge and Dock Company. And last but not least, I want to say a quick word about PT Capital. You just see the initials PT up there. Is Joe Sandberg in the room? There he is. Good morning, Joe, in the way back. For those of you who don't know, PT Capital is a brand new private equity firm in Alaska. Well, I'm not sure what brand new means, but new on the scene. And they are really born out of our Arctic conferences. It's one of the most tangible things that we've done that will have boots on the ground in the Arctic. They're dedicated to Alaska and the Arctic as where their investment dollars will go. And the person who was the very, very first idea man that gave birth to PT is said Joe Sandberg, sitting in the back of the room. He's not here as much as he would like. He'd love to be an Alaska resident. He's working on it. He's just not quite there yet. Anyhow, a special thank you to you, Joe. And at that point, I think I'm just going to give the mic to my favorite retired admiral.
Thanks, Alice. Thank you, Alice, and thanks for a wonderful evening last night and putting that on. And I want to thank everybody for showing up last night and listening to the great speakers that we had. President Grimson, good morning. Thank you for your comments last night. Hopefully you got a good night's sleep, and you're kind of more in the afternoon now than you are in the middle of the night. So great. It's great to be back here in Alaska. It's great to see so many friends. I'm going to moderate this morning and work with our clock police over here as we look to talk about some of the more relevant issues on the Arctic and some of the details in Alaska and the changing maritime environment. Meade Treadwell is going to replace me. He's had to step out this morning, and then he'll take over the second half of this morning. We have a number of speakers to get through. I'll introduce each one of them at the appropriate time when they come up to the mic. And in the meantime, I'm going to open up with some general comments about the Arctic, set the stage a little bit on the change and set some perspective out there on what's going on, particularly as it affects the entire state of Alaska. This conference here is, in fact, about Alaska, and I'll talk about that a little bit in my comments as to why this is a special meeting, and I'm real pleased to have everybody here. We heard some comments last night that I will reiterate here, things like shared responsibility, things like value-added opportunity, talking about how the Arctic and the changing maritime environment affects this whole state. So I'll begin with, as I said, with my comments for about 10 or 15 minutes. We're going to go to the speakers. We're going to have an opportunity for some Q&A. So if you have questions when we're done speaking, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll try to get to some of those questions, being mindful of the overall time this morning. So I'll begin with welcoming again and saying good morning to everyone. Welcome to the great state of Alaska and this wonderful Arctic Summit on ports and waterways and infrastructure. I'm so pleased to be back here once again with friends and colleagues in this great state. And I look around this room, I see an unstoppable force of leaders and thinkers, all of whom give me great confidence that the direction we're going in the future of Alaska is bright and in good hands. It's also August in Alaska, and as we heard last night, there's no shortage of visitors and politicians and CODELs and sightseeing tours and fact-finding trips all over the state. It seems like this time of year, everybody wants to come to Alaska and stand on the shores of Barrow or visit with leadership here in Anchorage. And this year, with the president coming, it's even more exciting than ever. And you add on top of that the fact that Shell is engaged in drilling in the Chukchi, and it's a very, very exciting summer and a very exciting time for Alaska. This summit, however, is one, as I said, is focusing on the state of Alaska and the impacts that maritime trade is having, the changing maritime environment is having, the changing global environment is having vis-a-vis the Arctic on the entire state. And there's many forums that take place, and I'm still in D.C., and I'm on a 12-step program trying to get out of there at this point. But I can tell you that a lot of people talk about the Arctic and a lot of people talk about Alaska, and a lot of them have never been here. And I get the impression sometimes when I go to meetings, whether it's at the Pentagon or other places in town, that there's a lot of people talking for Alaska. And they're trying to tell from D.C. what is good for Alaska. This conference is about Alaskans talking about here and about what is best for this state. And looking at the lineup of speakers over the next couple of days, we'll be rolling up our sleeves and getting into some of those details. It's also clear to me, as usual, that the people of Alaska are taking matters into their own hands and setting the course for the future based on what's best for you all. Because after all the excitement is done and all the buzz about the Arctic is done, and this moves down the road a few years, it will be the state and the people of Alaska that reap the benefits of our smart decisions or pay the consequences and the price for mismanagement. So as for my comments, I'm hoping to briefly set the stage for possible futures and reviewing the cause for action that brings us all here together today. As an Alaskan and a recently passed Coast Guard Admiral, retired Coast Guard Admiral and District Commander for the state, and with a lot of time in D.C., I think I can provide an interesting perspective on the change that is happening. So I'm going to begin with why are we talking about infrastructure, why are we talking about ports and waterways, and why now, what's the sense of urgency. And I would start with saying that, first of all, change is happening whether we like it or not. We are not in control of the impacts and the effects that are happening to the state. And as I said before, Alaska is the most maritime connected, maritime dependent state in the U.S. If you look at just our physical location, if you look at where most of the economy and how it's managed, how it's grown through the maritime commerce, whether that's the terminus of the TAPS pipeline and the shipping of oil, whether it's fishery, whether it's all the products that come to here, that come through the port of Anchorage, we are very maritime connected. And the infrastructure that we're talking about to prepare for the future is expensive. It takes years to develop. It involves managing risk and uncertainty. And it has to be done. Someone has to do this, and it's up to us to step up and do this. Monumental undertakings such as pipelines, ports, ships, shipbuilding, education, as we heard a little bit last night from Fran and others, and all kinds of industries that support this change have to be developed here in Alaska. Today's efforts are huge, and they remind me, when I look back in history, as a student of history, of other great monumental and important infrastructure developments that have taken over time, whether that's the Transcontinental Railroad or the Panama Canal or the purchase of Alaska itself or the pipeline, the TAP pipeline when that was put together. All of those projects, like we face today, had debate, they had doubt, they had consternation, but all over time proved to be indispensable. And there are a number of indispensable decisions we have to make today about our future that will be impactful and, in fact, critical to the success of this state in the long run. The Arctic. The Arctic is key to Alaska because of the Bering Strait. It's key to Alaska because of where we are located on the planet. The U.S. is the largest globalized maritime commerce-dependent nation in the world. And from a perspective of trade, the opening up of the Arctic, as we heard last night, changes the game, changes the flow of commerce, has the potential to have huge impacts. And when I look at Alaska and I think about other places and I think about famous maritime straits around the world, and I look at what is going on here vis-a-vis global warming, the swing to the Pacific and the U.S. interest there, scarcity, geographic positioning of the state, globalization, energy, national defense, all of that is a confluence of externalities that are coming together in this changing Arctic. It puts Alaska, in my opinion, in a singularly unique position, both as a state in the United States and with respect to the rest of the world. It gives us unexpected clout in the world that nobody could have predicted just a few years ago. And it may turn out in the long run that with all the great assets the state of Alaska has, whether that's minerals and oil and gas, fisheries, and the things that we've been leveraging over the past and we've developed over the past, it may turn out that the greatest asset we have in the long run is the Bering Strait in the Arctic. And how we develop that asset and how we prepare ourselves for the future is critical. Having a new ocean open up off the shores of Alaska that represents an entire new perspective on global trade and logistics, and at the same time opens up trillions of dollars of resources, natural resources for development, is a once-in-a-millennium event. And I think that's important to understand that this is not something that comes along, very often. I just finished reading a book on Christopher Columbus and the discovery of the New World, and a lot of the tenets in there from hundreds of years ago remind me of what's happening here today. So we must get this right. We must pay attention to the opportunity we have. Second of all, the world's not going to wait for us. And you've heard me say this before in some other public comments, is whatever the U.S. wants to do is interesting, but it's not the final word on what's going to happen in the Arctic. So the rest of the world is not going to wait for us. We cannot sit back and watch events unfold on a global scale without interacting with it. It is certainly not a plan for success to stand back and do nothing. This means that we need to be smart and understand the details around what is taking place. So we heard about, Fran last night talked about the shipping assessment and the 17 different points in there. There's other things going on, like Article 76 under the Law of Sea Treaty. It might sound like a recondite or some academic term or thing that somebody talks about at a cocktail party. But when you look at Article 76 under the Law of the Sea Treaty, that's about the extended continental shelf claims. Russia just filed their extended continental shelf claim. A few years ago, they stuck a flag at the North Pole and claimed it for Russia. I've talked to the guys that did that. And they're very proud of that fact. Now they're making the legal step under the Law of the Sea to do that. We're not, because we haven't ratified the Law of the Sea, we are vulnerable to losing our outer continental shelf, extended continental shelf rights to other people. So it's important for the people of Alaska, and particularly important for the people in this room, to understand the details that are going on around the world globally and the legal details around which have to take place for us to be relevant. One only needs to look at the Russians, as I said. Take a look at President Putin and all the things he's got going on in his world, and for whatever your opinion is of that, he is focused on the Arctic. Whether it's icebreakers, whether it's new infrastructure built on bricks and mortars on the beach up there, whether it's making claims under Article 76, whether it's sticking a flag at the North Pole. The Russians are interested in the Arctic, and that is meaningful to the state of Alaska. So discussions about sovereignty, disaster response, assured access through national capabilities like icebreakers and air bases and UAVs, technology and education are real problems for today and real problems for everybody in this state. As I speak, there's over 100 ships in the Arctic sailing around, doing stuff, moving everything from people to oil through the Arctic. Many of those will go through the Bering Strait. Most of them are foreign flag ships, which we have no control over. I was talking to some of you all last night, and you've got foreign flag ships visiting your cities and your towns without any advance notice of arrival. They show up, a bunch of folks speaking a different language come walking through town. Who's watching that? We need to be watching that. The U.S. needs to be watching it. The people of Alaska need to be watching it. Shell's drilling in the Burger Field, as I said today, and a half a dozen other countries are developing resources in the Arctic as we speak. So it's not a matter of if, but when and how will Alaska be affected by the changes in the Arctic. Finally, the changes in the Arctic are not just issues for places like Barrow, Little Diomede, Point Hope, and the other villages north of the Arctic Circle, but it affects the entire state. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit here. It is a significant event from everything from Ketchikan, Prince Rupert, which is an amazing port, Canadian port. If you haven't been there, you need to take a look at it. It's changing global trade. It's going to have a huge impact on Arctic trade. over time. It's the most advanced port in North America. It's got some of the best dwell times anywhere in the world on moving TEUs from ships to rail. They will soon be, by 17, moving about 1.5 million TEUs through Prince Rupert. And you go like, okay, that's interesting. Whatever he's talking about, some admiral doesn't know anything. But it's now bigger than the port of Oakland and the amount of shipping that goes through there. It means that more ships pass by on Alaska. That means events like Salandang IU and other things are more likely to happen in the future. The Kitimat, there's oil and gas possibilities for export. That means that same oil and gas now will be going past on Alaska through Unimak Pass. That means that when you want to move product from North America to Rotterdam, it'll come out of Prince Rupert and go over the top. Save about 14 days in travel by any other means. That's going to happen. And that is a very modern port. It's a privately owned port. There's a lot of lessons that can be learned there. But a vibrant Arctic maritime market affects the entire state. When I look across the state, I think about Ketchikan. Our best shipbuilding opportunity is in Ketchikan right now with vigor. What does that look like? What does that look like with a modern shipping infrastructure? Are we still going to send, in the future we have a Finnica problem, are we going to still send them down to Portland to get fixed, or are we going to be able to send them right into Ketchikan to get fixed? To me, we want them to go to Ketchikan or Dutch Harbor or some other place that has the infrastructure to support them. You know, what's the impacts on a small boat builder like Allen Marine and Sitka? If the Arctic takes off and all of a sudden Allen Marine starts putting more and more of its boats, more and more of its ice-capable small boats up north, has a huge impact on a city like Sitka. If you take a look at the other places around the state, whether that is on Alaska, what's the impacts of that great deep water port on the Arctic? We've talked before about sending fresh sea product over the top out of Alaska. You know, I think that is a great opportunity for us. It's brought about by the Northern Sea Route and the opportunity to send product, a great Alaskan product, straight to Europe over the top. So an unlikely sleepy Canadian town is really changing the way global commerce travels around the world. It is bending the curve of shipping from LALB up towards Prince Rupert. As the Arctic opens up, that curve of shipping is going to continue to move north, and it's going to have huge impacts around the state.